Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and, usually, on location. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're discussing the great social and political upheavals that are happening all around us, and the feeling of techies wondering what they can do to help improve the situation and bring more justice to the world. Before we begin, quickly, let's meet who's on the panel today. I'm Stephen Foskett, your host, editor of Gestalt IT, and founder of Tech Field Day. You can find me on Twitter at @sfoskett, and you'll find a lot more of my writing on gestaltit.com.
Hi, I'm Josh Fidel. I'm a Principal Solution Architect, Office of the CTO at Advisix. You can find me online at thevfidel.com and also on Twitter at JCEFidel.
I'm Leon Adato. I am a head geek. Yes, that's really my title at SolarWinds, which is neither solar nor wind. It is a systems monitoring software vendor. And you can find me on the Twitters, which I say to horrify my children, at Leon Adato. You can also find me, I blog about things both technical and religious on adatosystems.com.
I'm Karen Lopez. I'm DataChick on Twitter. I'm a project manager and data architect based in Toronto, and it's all about the data for me.
And I'm Phoummala Schmitt. I am a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, and you can find me on the Twitters as @ExchangeGoddess, talking about food, wine, and tech, and lobsters.
So a lot of us in the tech space have been watching sort of the major crises that are sweeping the world right now. We've got the COVID pandemic. We've also got just a tremendous outpouring of, I think, frustration over the state of, race relations in America and policing. And a lot of us are wondering, what exactly can we do? How can we apply our tech knowledge? But also, I think those of us who are more self-reflecting are kind of asking ourselves, what really do I have to say about these problems? These are sort of outside of tech. But one of the things that brought my attention to this topic was when Josh brought it up. I realized that many of us aren't just techies. Many of us do have lives outside of tech and, strongly held beliefs. And that's especially true of the group of folks that we have on here today. I think that, if you get to know any of us, you'll find that we have, a lot more to say about these things and a lot more life experience in these things than you'd expect from somebody who spends a lot of time talking about enterprise tech or data centers or whatever. Leon, I want to start with you. Tell us, sort of how people feel at this point in history and why we need to talk about this.
Well, picking up from the thought that you said, I think that as IT people, we're sort of genetically predisposed to want to fix things. And looking around at the larger world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, and it's also easy to feel like I have nothing to contribute. I can't hack the social system to make it better. I can't geek harder to do that. However, I think there's an opportunity for us to recognize that the systems that we're looking at outside of our homes in the world around still have similarities to the systems that we deal with every day. That there are ways that we have of looking at the way how things interact that may be different from people who aren't in IT. And likewise, I think that the techniques that we use to approach and even solve problems in our regular IT daily lives can be brought to bear to at least begin the process of analyzing and wrapping our heads around the problems that we see writ large across our society. And once you do that, you start to have a sense of not what can be done to fix it, but what can I do to play my part to help solve these problems, or at least to help be part of the solution.
So Josh, you were the one who, brought this concept to mind. Is this, how you feel as someone who is not just a nerd, but also a, caring human being and who's concerned about everything that's going on in the world?
So there were some personal events that occurred to me that made me wonder what I could do to help make things better. I mean, as a solutions architect, that's my job. I want to make systems better. So I started looking into an ROI for the police. And I wanted to know, how much do we spend on the police yearly? What are their outcomes? What are our crimes cleared reports? What are our use of force complaints, and how much do we pay in settlements? Really getting into the TCO of our police force. And I started digging into things, and I was looking at data, and I found that the data is terrible. One tool I did find, put together by some people on NPR, had data from 2011 to 2013. However, I contacted the people who put it together, and what they told me was this, and this is a direct response from the people who built this data tool. The ragged quality of crime and police data nationally has been a problem for a long time. The federal government doesn't really have the leverage to require reporting because of local control of policing. This is one of the items being considered in Congress right now, I'm told. As I'm sure you will recall, we don't even have an official national count of people killed by the police. News organizations like The Guardian and Washington Post and a couple of websites create those counts by monitoring local news coverage. So that tells me something about the data. I turn to IT professionals to help.
Yeah, and I think that's really it. And when you said that, it reminded me of the COVID count as well, which is just all over the place. It's not clear what they're counting in different places, what they're including. Just this morning I heard that like Georgia went through and like redid their count because they were including, things that they just all sorts of stuff. It almost seems like these people don't actually understand what they're doing.
Well, and also we just saw a news report the other day that they might have undercounted all the cases in March by 80%.
80%.
Just 80%, right? And I just want to say that we in IT are no strangers to poor quality data, having to make decisions based on poor quality data.
And right. This is how I see the problem being a data person. So I'm always going to see it through those lenses, is that, so I have a little bit of background here, having worked in several criminal justice systems throughout the US, as well as being part of a 3-generation law enforcement officer family. I get to see it from all kinds of points of view. And one of the things I know is they have terrible data issues, mostly because these systems for that kind of data are built from the ground up in very small silos. So a rural county police force that also has a sheriff organization covering the same area. So 2 small organizations in a small county. If you don't design data to be shared outside of your silo, it makes it almost impossible. Even if all those data sets were just a switch was turned on and they could be shared now, they'd be practically unusable at this point. If any is usable, it's only through the grace of their having used similar IT vendor systems.
So we've got to work together, right? Like the silos have basically got to stop. If we want to make progress, share data, these independent local government, state government, federal government, we've got to work together. We have to have some type of requirements. I believe that we have some, but not like a really defined set of requirements. And then we take those requirements, and in each system or each local government, state government, each part takes those requirements and builds off that. So we have a set of standards. We need standards. It's sort of like the, I don't know, I'm going to throw DevOps into this as well, where it's about the people, and we take the processes, we fine tune those processes with the tools that we're going to develop. We put everything together, and yes, there's going to be iterations. We're going to be, deploying in production certain systems. We're going to be constantly improving it. But if we're all working together cohesively to an end goal, eventually we may, get to a state where we can say that we are successful. I'm realistic. It's not going to happen overnight. but it takes the people, it takes changing culture. It takes people, it takes bringing people together, taking those people and say, hey, here are all the stakeholders. Let's get in the room, let's sit at the table, and let's figure out what we have to do. You know, to Karen's point, let's figure out all that data. Where's all the data coming from? Do we need to refactor certain systems? Do we need to build new systems? We basically have to start getting together and talking, just like this roundtable. And it's just not talk. We actually have to have action.
I support everything we're saying here, but if I come back to our premise that can we use what we know about IT to get towards a more just world? I mean, part of the problem we have is that we don't even understand the actual problem. We're seeing the edges of it, but we have no way of monitoring what's going on in our local world with all of these systems. And by systems here, I don't mean IT systems. I mean the system of people, places, things, and events that are happening around us. We hear about them, as Josh mentioned, because they made the news. But think about all the thousands and thousands of interactions we have with police, with other authorities, with conservation officers, with everything. Like, it's as if we're managing a data center, meaning data center being like our society, but we have zero monitoring. We only manage to smoke and flames. And that doesn't even begin to cover all the problems with the system if we're only being firefighters instead of being actual managing the system. Like, we're getting pretty good at predicting when a hard drive might fail, but we're not good at predicting when a team of people is going to fail spectacularly and it's going to harm people.
We're good firefighters. We're just not good being proactive. Where's the fire alarm? We're not good at putting that fire alarm on and putting the battery in and getting those alerts. But hey, that fire is flaming. We've got the hose and we're just spraying tons of water.
So one of the things that came up in our conversations yesterday and the day before is this concept of observability. Now, here in the IT space, a lot of us have been grappling with sort of analogous questions of, you know, how do we monitor systems? How do we monitor, you know, and of course, this is a system too. It's just not a tech system. How do we know what we don't know? How do we look for what we need to know? And this brought us to this whole thing of observability. So I'm hoping, you know, Leon, you, I think, were able to, I mean, this is your thing, right? You were able to tell us, yeah, you know, in our previous discussions, you know, what is observability and you know, in a general sense?
Sure. So to define observability, because we're good IT people, we want to define our terms before we go racing down the road of a solution. At least we're supposed to do that. The general idea of observability is that you have multiple sources of information, not multiple sources of truth, but multiple sources of input. So whether that's logging or tracing or poll-based values, you have a lot of streams of input to understand what's going on with your systems, whether they're societal or IT, and you do two things with that. One, you want to find consistent sources of issues, not noise, but things that repeatedly and regularly and predictively go wrong. But the other thing you want to use observability for is to find the rare signals, the things that come up and have what's called high cardinality, a lot of uniqueness to it, because those sometimes are really good predictors of worse things to come, the so-called black swan events. So using that in our current topic, the idea is, can we first identify our sources of input, even though we know that they're not perfect? So whether that's sources of news or going out and asking the police or the medical community, can you give me your data for the day, or whatever it is, and using that and aggregating it. Unfortunately, the hard work in observability is normalizing that data so that there's a consistency, at least the columns line up, and going from there. So that's the idea that we were hitting on as far as, can we geek this problem harder?
I would say, I mean, so the majority of my work now is on the design. It's on the front end. And I would say we'd have to design a system and put these requirements for data gathering in place. We would have to put, what are our constraints? What are our design decisions when it comes to to collecting and aggregating and reporting on this data. And I don't think we have any sort of system in place like that. So that's actually one of the things I'm going to advocate for, not only at a local level, but also at a state and federal.
Well, and I think that one of the things that especially the Black Lives Matter protests have raised up is that we do need clearer sources of truth. And I think COVID has done it also, but again, the incentivization for normalizing and sharing that data was a lot higher. People, you know, everyone getting sick is different than what we're seeing out on the streets with the protests. And, but I think that both are highlighting the idea that, yeah, we need to have places that we can go and ask for this information. Karen, I know that you've dealt with this a lot more than I have.
Yeah, I mean, this is where citizen data scientists, which I know sounds like a really fluffy world, but there are literally tons of people with good data qualification. And one of the hard parts about justice system data is we have to deal with privacy issues. We have to deal with the fact that the justice system, one of the things it struggles with is we have the opposite of a loyalty program. You have customers in the justice system who work really hard not to be identified as a return customer. So you have to have data items, like 140 data points to confidently identify a person. And that includes data about people's body parts, their scars, marks, and tattoos. Like, that's also the hard part about aggregating this data. But let's say we anonymize that data and we're just going to report events and incidents, like not which hard drive failed, but actually how many. Like, let's say we did that. There's all these political issues with it. And by political, I mean local politics. So for instance, here in Toronto, there's been this back and forth about whether policing systems should collect demographics like race or ethnicity or national origin, because the sensitivity of that, of the bias in arresting someone might make a classification or a group of people look like they're more criminal. And we're dealing with similar situations with that in the US. But I think here and outside the US, we have stronger federal structures. So there are some more reporting systems for collecting data. But I think underneath, if you're only getting access to reports, you're not getting access to underlying data. And that's where the monitoring and observability, the sunlight happens.
I think all of us can agree that sunlight is one of the most important things, you know, no matter whether you're trying to debug a system in a technology sense or in a political and real world sense. But you know, another point that came up and that I'm concerned about is, you know, something that Karen talks a lot about in terms of sort of even understanding the context of the data, understanding, you know, what we're asking for and what this really means. And, you know, if, you know, like she was just saying, you know, if we're going to classify things, you know, if we're going to include like, you know, ethnicity, for example, does that poison the data? Does that help the analysis, or does that lead to some undesirable conclusion? And it could do any of those. I mean, it kind of comes down to understanding the nature of the data and the nature of the question. You know, how do we improve not just collecting the data and categorizing the data, but actually using the data?
That's where the taking action part comes, the accountability. You know, now that let's say we've built these systems, we're all talking together, you know, we're collaborating. When we get this data, we've got to be able to make action. We've got to take action on it, right? We've got to make some change with the data. Just having this data does nothing for us. It's just like, hey, we've got it. We actually have to implement change from it. And sometimes we don't do that too well. Again, this goes back to my point. It's a cultural change. We've got to change the culture, the mindset with everyone, you know, blacks, white, purple, red, whatever color you are. Each of us has we've got some bias built into us, regardless of the color of your skin. We've got to change that mindset and retrain those muscles kind of think beyond colors, beyond skin color, beyond, you know, any type of disability, beyond men, women. We've got to take those filters off and see each other just as humans, and look at the data and go, okay, here's how we're going to make the changes, and then make those changes.
Well, and I'll also say that this is, again, not different from what we deal with as IT professionals in our day-to-day life, because it's never the network. You know, it's always the data. It's always the data.
It's always the network. What?
It's never the network. It's never the database. It's not my system. You know, those servers weren't built correctly. Blamestorming comes far before brainstorming in terms of solving a problem. We know this, and we know that having the data is only half the battle. Interpreting the data is the other piece. And to Phoummala's point, and to Stephen's point also, we have to get the data, we have to agree on how we want to interpret that information, and then we have to decide both individually and as small communities where we live and larger communities as a society, how we want to act and react to that stuff. Because one of the things that we talked about as we prepared for this was, you know, what am, as an IT professional, as somebody who's civically minded, as someone who is concerned about what I'm seeing outside, you know, the window where I am quarantined, you know, all that stuff. What am I supposed to do about this? I mean, what's the best use of my time? Should I be giving blood? Should I be driving people to the polls so that they can register? Should I be going out on the streets and what is the best use of my time? But you can't know that until you have a clearer sense of what's happening.
And so what's happening? That's a very good point. And we've been talking a lot about, you know, data in relation to the police. Okay, let's talk about data in relation to COVID. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of Rebecca Jones, a data scientist who created the COVID dashboard for Florida to show transparently as much of the data as possible. She was fired because she was told to alter the numbers. She was told to change things. She refused. She was terminated. Now, just yesterday, this is what she posted online. Florida announced yesterday they're not counting the ICU bed availability anymore, a key element in keeping things open. Breaking 2 of 3. I have multiple sources at the Florida Department of Health who have just told me they have been instructed this week to change the numbers and begin slowly deleting deaths and cases, so it looks like Florida is improving next week. Breaking 3 of 3. I've independently verified they've deleted at least 1,200 cases in the last week. Someone once told me that tech is not political. Tech should not be political. I can't think of a better time for tech to be political.
Yeah. Go ahead, Karen. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we've had this conversation about, you know, why is this politics? Like, I don't want to answer that question, but, you know, having accurate data about a pandemic, we can disagree about the significance of a particular data item if we know where that data item came from. Like I know as a data person, I see these, like, a little bit of variability in the data, and I know that could be just tied to how often they're reporting, because again, we have silos of information, and some of it's batch reported every week, and some every hour, and some of it's live streamed. I mean, this is an instance, a day's worth of data isn't that significant if we're managing trends. But I'm also sharing Josh's frustration about the fact of, you know, we're talking about something very serious, and we need that transparency into the data systems themselves so that we know what we can believe about the data. You know, they aren't opinions, they're data, they're facts. How we interpret them could be political, but the actual fact that some incident happened, it shouldn't be erased. It should be like generally accepted accounting principles. If someone made an error in the data, there should be an offsetting transaction that's transparent, that's observable about that. And I'm getting frustrated as well about, you know, who knows what's going on with this data? So if I applied my IT thinking to it, this is all about data governance, which sounds like a big floofy thing that data architects like me want, but this is exactly what data governance is. It's good governance. And for me, the only way that I can do what I want to do with it is focus on contacting my legislators every day. It's really easy with certain bots and systems. It's not like you have to mail off a letter. I want to be trying to find that data, to correcting other people who are saying, look, the trends are going down. And I'm like, no, that line's headed up. And then, of course, the call to action for me is I'm going to vote. And that's what makes it politics. But it's not politics about what the data is. It's politics about what we should do with it, what actions we should be taking.
I'm frustrated because there are people that don't believe the data. These are ones and zeros, right? You can't get any more basic than that. And there are people out there that don't believe the numbers. This is math. How could you not believe math? It's science. And to me, it's just so frustrating. And then from governance, I'm a governance, like I love governance. And to see data manipulation like this is so frustrating. And of course you can't trust the numbers now if you're manipulating the data. We've got to have governance in place to make sure that the integrity of the data, is in place. It's this whole situation is just absolutely frustrating between the pandemic, race relations. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm so tired. It's so frustrating. Like I want to help everybody, but I feel like I can't help because I faced the discrimination probably more so than everyone on this panel. I grew up being discriminated against, so I feel it, and I want it to go away. I want to fix it, but I can't. So I'm frustrated and I want to help, but I don't even know where to start anymore.
As we run systems, as IT people, applications crash. Maybe someone doesn't get their email. Maybe a bad business decision is made. When the systems we live in crash, people die. I can't accept it.
I think all of this is really offensive to nerds. I mean, I think part of the nerd culture is sort of what Karen and Phoummala were saying, that, we believe in facts, we believe in data, we believe that there is, that there's truth and there are numbers. And it really is almost offensive to us when we're confronted with situations that either have bad data or have manipulated data or have no possibility. And I think maybe we need to accept that too. Leon, there's something I've learned from you. There are things that are knowable and things that are unknowable. And maybe we need to accept that in the real world, sometimes things aren't like our data world and our data selves. Unfortunately, I think that we need to wrap our episode here of On-Premise IT Roundtable. I'm wondering if maybe I can ask each of you to maybe jump in with a final thought before we wrap. This has been a very intense discussion, and I really appreciate, again, having you all in here. Why don't we start with Leon, since I see that you're ready to say something, and then we'll have Phoummala, Carrie, and Josh jump in as well.
Sure. I wanted to speak to the fact that anyone who's watching, and even if you're listening, you can hear the emotion in everyone's voices, that there's no such thing as value neutral technology. There was a IT pundit for many years, Bob Lewis, who said that there's no such thing as a technology project. There's only business initiatives that have a technology component. But I think extending that, there's no such thing as, societal change that happens on its own. There's local initiatives that have perhaps a larger impact in the world. How are we behaving? How are we communicating? And even that can have an impact in the larger world.
final thoughts and statements from me. I have a lot to say, but I don't have a lot to say at the same time because there's so much frustration. Make good choices. Make good choices in everything that you do. Reach out to others to find out more. Don't just settle for that one answer. If it doesn't sound right, you know, do the research. There's so much out there. You know, there's so much that we can do individually just to make this world a little bit better, one person at a time. That's all I can say. You know, make good choices.
Wow, this is a tough thing to summarize. I think that my realization in all of this, and along with my frustration that I'm in another country watching all this happen, is that there are things we need to do right now. Things are burning down. People are being killed. People are being harmed. People are being blinded. There's all this just massive, I can't find a polite word for it. There's just a lot of crap happening, and that there are things I need to do right now, like firefighting, breathing, bleeding, broken bones type triage. But I'm also trying to keep my head at what evolution, what revolution needs to happen with our society, not just with their IT and their data, but what needs to happen there. And I'm going to be doing both things behind the desk and from away from my desk in order to make sure everyone in society understands that a whole lot of people realize that something terrible is happening and that we need to be actually taking actions, not just reading about it and not just tweeting about it.
Okay. I apologize for my earlier emotion. I just get very angry and very frustrated when I see what's going on. But I do want to leave on a lighter note. And if you've ever seen Frozen 2, I'm sure some of you have. We have children. There's something I think about. Someone says to Olaf, they say, "Hey, Olaf, tell us about that thing you were saying the other day." And Olaf says, "What? How technology is simultaneously our greatest hope for salvation and also our possibility for a terrible doom?" And I would say yes. Yes, it is. There are things we can do as technologists, as system thinkers, as architects, as top-down designers. And I would urge everyone to start being political.
The message of all of this, and at least for me, is, you know, it's easy for us to be frustrated and to feel powerless and to feel like there's nothing we can do and that the world that we work in is separate from the world that we live in, but truly it's not. The world we live in the world we work in, it's all the same thing. There is no, you know, technical solutions. And there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to get involved. No matter where you come from, no matter what your political perspective is, you know, if you have an open mind and you have a focus on finding the truth, finding the true data, finding the real facts of the situation, I think that you can make a contribution here. And, you know, I think it's up to all of us. Again, as I said earlier, you know, it's a nerd thing. Like, we want there to be facts. We need to find the facts. We need to find this. And back to this whole idea of observability, we need to figure out how we can collect data, how we can store data, how we can share data, how we can parse data in a way that gets at the truth of the situation. And I think that that's really the ultimate challenge for us and the ultimate thing that we should all be working on. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, please remember to rate, subscribe, and review the show in iTunes, since that helps our visibility. And please do share this show with your friends. I know all of us would love to connect with you online as well. We gave our social media handles at the beginning. You know, please do reach out to us. You know, we all care deeply about this subject. This podcast was brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to gestaltit.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.